The drums of the village beat loudly that evening, but inside Kofi Adis's compound, there was only silence. The walls heard more sighs than laughter, and the hearth burned without warmth. Ebony sat alone on a wooden stool, tracing invisible circles on her belly. Every circle ended in emptiness, and her eyes had learned the language of quiet disappointment. Kofi watched her from the doorway, his chest heavy with a grief he could never speak. A man without a child in this land was a tree without fruit, standing but unfulfilled. Outside, women sang songs of motherhood as babies were passed from arm to arm. Each song struck Kofi like a spear, piercing the secret he hid even from his wife. He turned away from the sound, swallowing shame like bitter cola nut. That night, the drums celebrated life while Kofi buried his manhood in silence. By morning, whispers followed Ebony like shadows. Women spoke with their eyes, not their mouths, but the message was clear. She has been married 5 seasons. One voice hissed softly. Her womb sleeps like dry land. Another replied without mercy. Ebony carried water on her head, but it was shame that bent her back. Each step felt heavier than the calabash she balanced with practiced grace. Kofi heard the whispers too, but the village blamed Ebony, not him. In their eyes, a man was always fertile until proven otherwise. That evening, Ebony wept into her mat, tears soaking the earth beneath her. Kofi lay beside her, awake, knowing the truth was slowly killing them both. Kofi sought out Sephu beneath the ancient baobab tree where boys once became men. The tree had heard many secrets, but none as heavy as this. Sephu greeted him with laughter, but it died when he saw Kofi's eyes. Those eyes carried storms, regret, and a plea too painful to voice. I cannot give her a child, Kofi whispered, his voice cracking like dry wood. The words fell to the ground, breaking something sacred between them. Sephu stood frozen, the weight of his friend's shame pressing on his chest. In that moment, friendship became a burden shaped like destiny. The baobab leaves rustled as if the ancestors leaned in to listen. Silence stretched between the two men, thick with fear and unspoken sacrifice. Kofi's knees trembled as he spoke again, his pride already shattered. There is only one way to save her, he said, not lifting his head. Sephu's heart raced, already knowing what was coming. Some requests change men forever, even before they are accepted. Give her a child, Kofi said, tears spilling freely now. Let the village believe it is mine. The world tilted for Sephu, and the baobab seemed to groan in protest. To help was to betray, to refuse was to destroy a home. Sephu closed his eyes, praying for the ancestors to speak. But only the wind answered, carrying sorrow instead of guidance. Night fell like a curtain drawn over forbidden truth. Sephu walked home slowly, each step echoing the weight of what he carried. He thought of Ebony's kindness, her quiet strength, her suffering. He thought of Kofi's broken voice and the dignity he was willing to bury. By dawn, Sephu returned to the baobab tree. He did not speak, he only nodded once. Kofi collapsed to the ground, gratitude and grief tangled in his breath. 2 men cried beneath a tree older than their pain. The ancestors watched as fate was sealed in silence. From that moment, nothing in the village would ever be the same. The night arrived without ceremony, heavy and thick, as though the sky itself held its breath. No moon showed its face, and the stars hid like witnesses who refused to testify. Inside the hut, Ebony sat quietly, her hands folded over her lap, unaware that her life was about to fracture. Years of disappointment had taught her not to hope loudly, only to endure silently. When Sephu stepped inside, his shadow reached the wall before his body did. His heart pounded violently, each beat reminding him that honor was about to be sacrificed. Their eyes met, and the room filled with a sorrow too deep for language. What passed between them was not desire, but duty sharpened by desperation. Outside, Kofi knelt in the dirt, pressing his forehead into the cold earth. He begged the ancestors to forgive him for what love had forced him to do. Morning crept in quietly, pale and indifferent to human suffering. Birds sang freely, mocking the heaviness that settled on 3 broken hearts. Ebony woke with tears already on her face, unsure why her spirit felt bruised. She bathed in silence, scrubbing her skin as if she could wash away confusion. Sephu left before anyone could see him, walking toward the river with bowed head. He submerged his hands again and again, but guilt clung like blood. Kofi returned home, wearing a mask of calm so tight it hurt to breathe. He held Ebony longer than usual, as if afraid she would disappear. None of them spoke of the night. Silence became their oath, and suffering its price. The days that followed moved slowly, each one dragging its weight across Kofi's chest. He counted time obsessively, measuring hope and dread in equal portions. Ebony studied her body with careful attention, afraid to hope, afraid not to. Every sensation felt magnified, every delay whispered possibility. Sephu withdrew from village life, his laughter now a distant memory. Children stopped running toward him, sensing the sadness he carried. At night, Kofi dreamed of children with faceless eyes accusing him. He woke sweating, clutching his chest as if truth was strangling him. The waiting stretched their spirits thin. Time itself became cruel. One morning, Ebony woke with a strange stillness inside her. Her body felt different, alert, as if something had awakened. When the moon's cycle passed without blood, her hands trembled. Hope knocked softly, afraid of being chased away. The herbalist examined her slowly, eyes narrowing with focus. Then the old woman smiled, a knowing, gentle smile. "Life has taken root," she said softly. Ebony collapsed into tears that carried years of pain. Kofi stood frozen, joy and terror tearing him apart. The miracle had come, but truth had not followed it. The drums returned, louder than ever, shaking the ground beneath the village. Women danced, men sang, children clapped with careless joy. Kofi was lifted on his shoulders, praised as a true man at last. Every cheer stabbed his heart with cruel irony. Ebony smiled through tears, finally seen, finally valued. Her happiness made the lie unbearable. Sephu listened from afar, the sound of drums hollowing his chest. Celebration had never felt so much like mourning. The village praised a blessing. Only the ancestors knew its cost. As Ebony's belly grew, so did Kofi's devotion. He attended her every need with desperate tenderness. He whispered apologies to her womb when she slept, words meant for a child who could not understand. Sephu avoided the compound completely, afraid his eyes would betray him. Yet his dreams were filled with a child calling his name. The elders noticed the tension, the distance, the quiet suffering. Whispers returned, sharper than before. Secrets rot when buried too long. And this one was already decaying. Labor came violently, tearing through the calm of night. Thunder rolled as if the sky shared Ebony's pain. She screamed until her voice broke, clinging to life and hope. The women prayed loudly, fear trembling in their chants. Kofi paced outside, sweat soaking his clothes. He feared death, feared birth, feared truth. When the baby cried, sharp and strong, relief crashed over the village. Life had won. Kofi collapsed into sobs. A child had arrived, carrying both blessing and betrayal. The elders gathered days later, serious and proud. Naming binds a child to destiny. They named him Nala, the gift that arrives after sorrow. Kofi nearly broke under the weight of meaning. Ebony beamed with pride, holding her miracle tightly. Her suffering finally felt justified. Sephu stood at the edge of the gathering, unseen. His blood recognized itself. Nala cried loudly, piercing the air. Even newborns feel divided truths. Kofi took Nala everywhere, refusing to let doubt touch him. He became father in action, if not in blood. He fed him, bathed him, sang ancestral songs softly at night. Love grew fierce and protective. Each smile from the child healed something inside him. Each resemblance reopened wounds. Ebony praised Kofi openly, calling him a good man. Her words burned like fire. Kofi decided then. Truth would never steal this child from him. Sephu became a man the village no longer truly saw. He walked the paths at odd hours, before sunrise or after dusk, when eyes were fewer and questions slept. Once, his laughter had announced his presence long before his footsteps did. Now, silence followed him like a curse he could not outrun. Whenever Nala's laughter rang across the compound, Sephu's chest tightened painfully. The sound was familiar in a way that frightened him. The same sharp brightness his own mother once said he had as a child. Blood recognizes blood, even when names refuse to. Women tried to draw him into conversations about marriage, reminding him that time waits for no man. He only nodded politely, carrying a secret heavier than any wife could bear. How could he explain that his seed already walked the earth, calling another man father? At night, Sephu sat alone by the fire, staring into flames until his eyes burned. He imagined a future where the truth surfaced and destroyed everything he had tried to protect. He wondered if sacrifice was meant to hurt this much, or if the ancestors had turned their backs on him. Some men are praised for the children they raise. Others are broken by the children they must pretend not to know. Sephu belonged to the latter, carrying fatherhood like a wound that refused to close. Time moved forward without mercy. Nala grew tall and strong, his limbs stretching like young branches after the rain. The village admired him openly, praising Kofi for raising such a promising child, unaware that their compliments landed like stones on fragile glass. Kofi loved Nala fiercely, obsessively even. He taught him how to till the soil, how to greet elders, how to kneel in respect before the ancestors. Each lesson was given with the desperation of a man determined to earn a right that blood alone had denied him. Yet no amount of love could silence Kofi's fear. The boy's face mirrored Sephu more clearly with every passing season. Even strangers had begun to pause, eyes narrowing in recognition before quickly looking away. Ebony noticed too. At first, she dismissed the thoughts as foolishness, blaming idle gossip and tired eyes. But a mother knows her child's face intimately, and recognition crept into her heart like a slow poison. Time does not reveal truth suddenly. It erodes lies gently, patiently, until they collapse under their own weight. Baba Domo had lived long enough to understand that secrets leave footprints. He watched the boy, then the men, comparing gestures, expressions, silences. The pattern unsettled him deeply. During communal gatherings, his gaze lingered on Sephu whenever Nala laughed, and on Kofi whenever praise was given. One man looked haunted, the other overcompensated. Neither looked at peace. One evening, Baba Domo summoned Kofi quietly. No accusations were made, but the elders' questions circled like vultures. Kofi's answers came too fast, too carefully rehearsed. Wisdom does not require confession to know the truth. Baba Domo saw fear in Kofi's eyes, the kind only lies produce. He dismissed the man with a nod, saying nothing, but his silence carried judgment. From that moment, the elder began preparing for a reckoning. The ancestors, he knew, would not tolerate deception forever. The baobab tree stood unmoved by time, its roots deep in stories older than the village itself. Sephu returned there often, sitting where he and Kofi had once sealed their terrible agreement. One evening, Kofi joined him without invitation. Both men looked older than their years, bent not by labor, but by truth. For a long time, they said nothing, letting the wind speak for them. When words finally came, they came broken. Kofi spoke of fear, of love, of a child he could not imagine losing. Sephu spoke of emptiness, of nights filled with dreams that ended in tears. They wept openly, unashamed, as men stripped of pride. The earth beneath them absorbed their sorrow, as it had years before. The baobab listened. It had heard promises before. It knew this one was unraveling. Ebony could no longer ignore the weight in her chest. Pieces of memory began rearranging themselves, forming a picture she was afraid to see clearly. She watched Sephu when he thought no one noticed, the way his eyes softened around Nala, the way his hands clenched when the boy ran past. Recognition stirred like a storm behind her ribs. One night, she confronted Kofi quietly, her voice trembling with restrained fear. His hesitation, his inability to meet her eyes, told her more than words ever could. Her world cracked silently. Years of joy twisted into confusion and betrayal. She remembered that long night, the fog in her memory, the unasked questions. A mother's love is fierce, but a woman's heartbreak is unforgiving. Ebony knew the truth was near, and it terrified her. Nala's illness came suddenly, stealing his laughter and strength within days. His body burned with fever, and his eyes lost their playful light. Ebony refused to leave his side, praying until her voice cracked. Kofi hovered helplessly, guilt eating him alive with every labored breath the boy took. Sephu stood outside the compound, unable to enter, shaking like a leaf in harmattan wind. Fear tore through him violently. Fear of loss, fear of punishment. The elders murmured among themselves. Illness, they said, often followed hidden sins. The ancestors demanded honesty. Thunder rolled in the distance. Truth had begun its final approach. The summons came at dawn, carried by the deep, trembling beat of the ritual drum. Its sound rolled across the village like a warning, slow and deliberate, calling every soul to attention. Elders emerged from their huts with grave faces, knowing such a call was never made for joy. Ebony lifted her sleeping child and felt fear tighten around her heart. Nala's skin burned beneath her palm, his breathing shallow and uneven. She wrapped him tighter against her chest, whispering prayers she had learned from her grandmother, prayers meant for moments when hope began to fade. Kofi stood frozen in the doorway, the drumbeat pounding inside his skull. Every beat felt like an accusation, every pause like the ancestors waiting for him to speak. He knew this call was for him. Lies do not survive the shrine. Sephiu remained at the edge of the gathering place, half hidden by shadows. He had no right to stand among fathers and husbands, yet his blood lay burning in a child fighting for life. His legs trembled, not from fear of punishment, but from fear of truth. Baba Dumo raised his staff and silence fell. "The ancestors are restless," he said, his voice heavy with age and warning. "A child suffers because truth has been buried." The air thickened. No one dared to breathe. Kofi stepped forward slowly, as though each movement might shatter what remained of his life. He fell to his knees before the shrine, forehead pressed into the dust. When he spoke, his voice trembled, stripped of pride, stripped of defense. He spoke of his barrenness, of nights filled with shame, of watching his wife wither under blame that was never hers. His words poured out in broken fragments, each sentence a confession long delayed and deeply painful. When he spoke of Sephiu, gasps tore through the crowd. Mothers clutched their chests. Men turned away. The village felt the ground shift beneath their feet as truth finally rose. Ebony screamed, a raw sound that seemed to rip the sky open. She clutched Nala tightly, rocking back and forth, betrayal flooding every memory she had ever cherished. Her tears fell freely, soaking the earth that had witnessed her pain for years. Sephiu stepped forward then, voice shaking but firm. "I gave my seed so life would live," he said. "If punishment must fall, let it fall on me." The ancestors listened. Silence answered. Chaos followed. Voices rose, overlapping, angry and confused. Some elders called for exile, others for cleansing. Tradition had been violated, yet a child lived because of it. No law spoke clearly for such a wound. Women wept openly, moved by Ebony's suffering. Men argued bitterly, pride clashing with compassion. The village had never faced such a truth, one where love and deception walked hand in hand. Ebony sat silently now, empty of tears. Her heart felt hollow, but her arms held her child with fierce determination. Whatever the truth, this boy was hers, born of pain and endurance. Nala stirred weakly, his small fingers curling around his mother's cloth. A sudden hush fell over the gathering. Even in sickness, the child commanded attention. Baba Dumo raised his staff again. "We judge later," he declared. "First, the child must live." The ancestors, he said, demanded compassion before punishment. That night, Ebony went alone to Sephiu's hut. The moon hung low, watching quietly. Sephiu opened the door and fell to his knees immediately, unable to meet her gaze. She stood before him for a long time, her face unreadable. "You gave me what my husband could not," she said finally, her voice steady but exhausted. "But you also stole my choice." Sephiu wept openly, begging forgiveness he did not deserve. Ebony listened, her heart torn between gratitude and betrayal, between motherhood and womanhood. When she returned home, she knelt before Kofi. He looked smaller than she had ever seen him. She placed her hand on his head, trembling. "You are his father," she said softly. "Because you stayed." Kofi broke completely, sobbing like a child. Forgiveness, when it comes, often hurts more than punishment. Days passed, and Nala slowly recovered. His fever broke after the cleansing ritual, as if the ancestors had finally accepted the truth offered to them. The village exhaled collectively. When Nala was strong enough, Baba Dumo gathered the family. The truth was explained gently, in words shaped to protect a child's spirit rather than crush it. Nala listened quietly, eyes moving between the two men. At last, he reached for Kofi's hand, gripping it tightly. "This is my father," he said simply. Sephiu turned awa, tears streaming freely, pride and loss tearing through him in equal measure. He had given life, but love had chosen elsewhere. The village learned that day that fatherhood is not carried in blood alone. It is carried in sacrifice, endurance, and the courage to love without ownership. The village woke differently the morning after the confession. The air felt heavier, as though truth had changed the weight of breathing itself. People spoke in lowered voices, careful not to disturb the fragile peace that had replaced chaos. Ebony rose before dawn, her body exhausted but her spirit restless. She watched Nala sleep, his chest rising steadily now, and felt a strange blend of relief and sorrow settle deep within her bones. Motherhood had survived the storm, but womanhood had been wounded. Kofi sat outside the hut long after the fire died, staring at the ashes. For the first time in years, he felt both lighter and more afraid. Truth had freed him from lies, but it had also stripped him bare before the world. Sephi did not sleep at all. He wandered the edge of the village, avoiding familiar paths. Now that everything was known, his sacrifice no longer hid in silence. It stood exposed, misunderstood, and painful. The sun rose slowly, casting long shadows across the compound. The village had survived the night, but the consequences of truth were only beginning. By midday, the elders gathered beneath the Irako tree, faces stern and thoughtful. Tradition demanded judgment, but wisdom urged restraint. Never before had they judged a sin born entirely from love. Voices rose and fell in debate. Some demanded punishment for deception. Others argued that life had been preserved and no blood spilled. The law of ancestors wrestled with the law of compassion. Baba Dummo listened more than he spoke. When he finally rose, silence followed. Age gave his words weight, and grief gave them truth. There will be no exile, he declared, but there will be remembrance. Let no man repeat this path without consequence. The elders nodded slowly, accepting balance over vengeance. The verdict left no one fully satisfied, which meant it was fair. Justice, like truth, rarely comforts everyone. That evening, Sephu packed his few belongings into a worn leather bag. The village had spared him judgment, but his heart could not remain where his child lived without him. He visited Nala one last time while the boy slept. He did not touch him, fearing even that would wound him further. Instead, he whispered a blessing into the night air. When Kofi found him at the edge of the village, words failed them. Years of pain stood between them like a river too deep to cross. Sephu bowed his head. Love him without fear, he said. Kofi nodded, tears burning his eyes. Sephu walked away before dawn. Some sacrifices do not end. They simply move farther from home. Life slowly stitched itself back together inside Kofi's compound. The laughter that returned was softer, more careful, but real. Ebony and Kofi learned each other again, their love reshaped by truth. Trust returned not fully healed, but honestly earned. Nala thrived, unaware of the weight his life carried. He learned to farm, to sing, to listen to stories beneath the stars. Sometimes Ebony watched him quietly, tears forming without warning. Gratitude and grief lived side by side now. Their family was no longer perfect, but it was true. And truth, though painful, proved stronger than illusion. Years passed, and the village returned to its rhythms. Children grew, elders aged, seasons turned as they always had. Yet the story of Kofi, Ebony, and Sephu did not fade. It was told softly, with care, as a warning and a lesson. Baba Dummo often ended the tale the same way. Blood gives life, but love gives meaning. Nala grew into a man known for kindness and loyalty. Those who knew his story said his heart carried all three parents. And beneath the baobab tree, the earth remembered everything, a reminder that sacrifice, when born of love, never truly disappears. The years unfolded quietly after Sephu's departure, marked not by drama, but by steady survival. Rain came when it should, crops grew, and the village found its rhythm again. Yet for Kofi's household, every season carried memory. Ebony aged gently, her beauty deepening rather than fading. Lines formed on her face not from bitterness, but from endurance. She learned that strength was not loud resistance, but the quiet choice to wake up each morning and love again. Kofi worked harder than ever, driven by a need to prove that love could stand without lies. He rose before dawn, tilled until dusk, and returned home with tired hands and an open heart. Nala grew tall and thoughtful, absorbing stories from elders and lessons from the land. He had questions, but he learned early that some answers unfold with time. The seasons returned again and again, as they always do. But none passed without reminding the family that truth, once spoken, never truly leaves. Nala reached the age when boys were called to stand before the elders. His initiation came with fasting, instruction, and silence, the traditional preparation for manhood. Ebony watched him leave with pride, an ache braided tightly together. She knew the world would soon test him, just as it had tested those before him. During the nights of initiation, Nala dreamed of two men standing behind him. One taught him strength through presence, the other through absence. He woke with tears he could not explain. When he returned, marked and changed, Kofi embraced him without words. Father and son stood together, their bond unspoken but unbreakable. The elders declared Nala a man. But wisdom whispered that his true initiation had begun long before this day. As tradition demanded, Nala was sent alone to the baobab tree to reflect on his life and lineage. The same tree that had witnessed the birth of his destiny now awaited his understanding. He sat beneath its vast branches, feeling both small and protected. Stories he had overheard as a child returned to him, reshaping themselves with new meaning. For the first time, he fully understood the sacrifice that had shaped his life. His chest tightened, not with anger, but with sorrow and gratitude intertwined. He pressed his palm against the tree's rough bark and spoke aloud. "I know now," he said softly, as though the ancestors leaned close. The wind moved through the leaves in response. Some truths are answered not with words, but with peace. Years later, word came that Sephu lived in a distant settlement, older and quiet. Nala felt a pull he could no longer ignore. Kofi did not stop him. He understood that love does not cage, it releases. Ebony packed food for the journey with trembling hands and steady eyes. When Nala found Sephu, time collapsed. They stood facing one another, mirrors softened by years. Sephu wept openly, ashamed and proud all at once. Nala knelt, honoring both the gift of life and the pain of absence. Two fathers stood within one moment. One who gave blood, and one who gave everything else. When Nala returned, the village gathered to listen. His journey had completed the circle begun years ago beneath the baobab. He spoke not of betrayal, but of sacrifice, not of shame, but of love strong enough to endure truth. Baba Dumo, now bent with age, nodded with quiet satisfaction. The lesson had survived the telling. The story passed into legend, told to young men learning what it truly means to be a father. And so the village remembered, blood may begin a life, but love, chosen, tested, and endured, is what raises it. Baba Dumo's voice had grown thin with age, but when he spoke, the village still leaned forward. Time had bent his back, yet wisdom stood upright within him. On evenings when the fire burned low, he called the young men to sit close and listen. He told them stories of men who ruled with fists and men who ruled with love. Then, slowly, carefully, he spoke of Kofi, Ebony, and Sephu, never naming them at first, allowing the lesson to breathe before the truth revealed itself. The youths listened in silence, their faces shifting as understanding dawned. They had been raised on simple definitions of manhood, but this story unsettled them in a necessary way. Baba Dumo ended the tale the same way each time. The ancestors do not count blood alone. They count endurance. His eyes shone with tears that memory never quite released. When he finished, the fire cracked loudly, as if agreeing. Some lessons must be taught slowly, again and again, until they live inside the listener. Ebony had become one of the village's pillars, sought by young women burdened with fear and doubt. She listened more than she spoke, understanding that pain often only wants to be heard. When women whispered about infertility or betrayal, Ebony did not flinch. She had walked through both and survived. Her presence alone was reassurance that a woman could be broken and still remain whole. At night, she sat alone sometimes, remembering the years stolen by silence. Yet she did not allow bitterness to take root. Love, she had learned, must be chosen daily. She prayed often for Sephu, wherever he was, asking the ancestors to grant him peace. Forgiveness had not erased the past, but it had softened its grip. In her quiet strength, Ebony embodied a truth rarely sung. Survival is also a form of courage. Kofi aged into a man respected not for his strength, but for his honesty. Where once he hid behind silence, he now spoke openly, warning younger men against pride that isolates. He took orphan boys into his fields, teaching them work and patience. Fatherhood, he believed, multiplied when shared. Sometimes he stood beneath the baobab tree alone, resting his hand against its ancient bark. He remembered the choice that had nearly destroyed him and the love that had saved him. When people praised him, he bowed his head. Redemption, he knew, was not applause, but consistency. In loving without blood, Kofi had become a father to many, and the ancestors watched with approval. Nala's marriage was celebrated with careful joy. The village danced, but the songs were gentler than those of earlier generations, shaped by memory. Ebony dressed him in ceremonial cloth, her hands trembling as she adjusted the beads at his neck. Pride and loss mingled in her smile. Kofi stood tall beside him, tears unashamed on his face. This was the reward of endurance, not blood. When Nala poured libation, he honored three parents: the one who birthed him, the one who raised him, and the one who sacrificed in silence. The elders nodded solemnly. Love had expanded the definition of family. The village felt it deeply. On the night of Nala's marriage, the baobab tree stood illuminated by moonlight. Its branches swayed gently, heavy with history. Nala went there alone after the celebrations, seeking solitude. He placed his forehead against the trunk, feeling the pulse of generations beneath his skin. He whispered gratitude, for life, for love, for truth revealed before it destroyed him. The wind responded softly, carrying his words upward. The ancestors, satisfied, rested. The baobab remained, as it always had, a silent witness to sacrifice, forgiveness, and the enduring power of love. Years passed slowly, carrying all lives toward the inevitable truth of aging. The village continued its rhythm of planting, harvesting, and storytelling. But now, the story of Kofi, Ebony, Sephu, and Nala became sacred. Children gathered under the baobab tree, wide-eyed, listening to elders recount sacrifices, endurance, and love that transcends blood. Each retelling carried lessons not easily forgotten. Ebony would sit quietly nearby, her hands folded over her lap, watching faces light up with curiosity and fear. She smiled faintly, knowing the story was now hers to guard. Kofi, older now and slower in his steps, observed from the edge of the circle. Pride and humility mingled within him, the same mixture that had saved his family years before. The village understood. The story was not a shameful secret. It was a warning, a teaching, and a promise that love could endure even the deepest betrayals. Far away, Sephu lived quietly, often thinking of Nala. Though he had walked alone for years, he had never stopped blessing the boy in his thoughts, praying that life treated him kindly. He cultivated a small patch of land, helping neighbors and living modestly. Villagers whispered about the man who gave his seed and walked away, some in awe, others in pity. Every evening, he would look toward the direction of Kofi's village, imagining laughter and tears mingling there. The child he had given, though not raised by him, had flourished. Sephu understood, finally, that parenthood is not possession. It is sacrifice, often invisible, often misunderstood, yet eternal. In his quiet heart, he carried both grief and pride, learning that love could exist across distance and absence. Nala grew into a man of thought and action, admired not only for skill with the land but for the depth of his heart. He mediated disputes, comforted the grieving, and guided the young with patience. His fame did not come from wealth or conquest, but from the way he listened and acted with wisdom beyond his years. Many attributed it to the combined teachings of two fathers and a mother who had endured much. He often returned to the baobab tree, sitting beneath its branches to reflect, understanding that life's lessons are cyclical. When he spoke to children, he taught them that courage and honesty mattered more than pride, and that forgiveness was a strength, not a weakness. Through him, the village saw that even painful beginnings can yield beauty, if nurtured with care. The ancestors began appearing in small ways: a sudden wind, the rustle of leaves, a bird landing silently beside Nala. Each act reminded the villagers that the past was never gone. Baba Dumo, before his own passing, spoke of these signs, urging the young to respect them, to listen for whispers in the night that carried lessons. Ebony felt their presence more than anyone, especially when the seasons changed. She would kneel quietly, feeling the energy of lives intertwined across years, both seen and unseen. Even Kofi, who rarely spoke of these things, admitted in a whisper that sometimes he felt Sephiu's spirit walking with him during planting or at the edge of the firelight. The village learned that truth, love, and sacrifice do not die. They linger as guidance for those who remain. A new generation grew up hearing the story of Nala's birth and the sacrifices made for him. It became more than a tale. It became a moral compass. They learned that families can be formed from choice, endurance, and devotion, not only blood. They learned that mistakes are human, but courage defines response. Some of the children would play near the baobab tree, imagining themselves heroes in their own stories. Others sat quietly, contemplating the weight of adulthood they had yet to bear. Ebony watched all of it, knowing she had survived long enough to see the story shape hearts without her voice even needing to speak. This was the quiet power of legacy. The living teach through life, not lectures. In his old age, Sephiu returned once to the village, silent and unannounced. No one recognized him immediately. Years had softened his face, and time had cloaked his presence. He watched from a distance as Nala worked the fields, now a man responsible for many lives. A surge of pride and melancholy swept over him. Kofi saw the figure first and froze. Recognition came slowly, like sunrise spilling over the horizon. The reunion was quiet. Words were few, but hearts spoke in the language of shared sacrifice. Nala approached, smiling warmly, accepting both men in his life fully. Sephiu left again after a day, knowing his role was complete, leaving peace behind rather than disruption. Baba Dumo passed quietly, as he had lived, slowly, with dignity. The village mourned, but also celebrated a life that had shaped generations. Ebony and Kofi stood together at his funeral, holding hands, understanding that the stories he had told were now part of their very bones. Nala spoke of endurance and truth, repeating lessons learned at the feet of elders. His voice carried the weight of generations. Children wept and elders nodded, as the story continued to settle like a river flowing through all of them. Death had come, but the lessons remained, preserved in hearts and memory. Nala became a father, teaching his children the story of their origins with honesty and care. He explained the sacrifices, the love, and the pain without shame. Ebony, now grandmother, listened as the children asked endless questions. Her eyes filled with tears, not of sorrow, but gratitude. Kofi watched his grandson laugh and run, feeling the quiet triumph of endurance across generations. The village recognized that the cycle had completed a new chapter. Life and story intertwined seamlessly. Legacy, they realized, is measured not in years but in the truths passed down with love. The story of love, sacrifice, and endurance became the foundation of the village's wisdom. Weddings, births, and initiations always carried reference to Nala's tale. Children learned that mistakes can be forgiven, truths honored, and love chosen over pride. The baobab tree stood tall, witness to countless lives, its roots intertwined with memory and morality. Ebony, Kofi, and Nala grew old, their lives interlaced with the village like threads in a tapestry, visible and strong. The story became legend, told in whispers and shouts, in fireside songs and quiet teachings. Centuries later, children still sit beneath the baobab tree, listening to the elders tell the story. Blood, love, and sacrifice weave together in every retelling. The village continues its cycle of planting and harvesting, but the story survives beyond seasons, teaching courage, patience, and the power of truth. Ebony, Kofi, and Sephiu live in memory now, ancestors in their own right, guiding hearts through silence, loss, and love. Nala's descendants honor the tale, carrying the lesson that fatherhood, sacrifice, and honesty are intertwined with the land and the people. The baobab watches silently, eternal. Stories begin and end, but some truths, once given, never die. Please subscribe, comment, like, share for more videos.